have a mover. His apologies. Deputy Mayor Steve seconded. Wasn't sure which. Whoever. I think Councillor Dale. Thank you. Now we need before we do the conflicts of interest declaration, we need a motion to receive the 2 late items. I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dale, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Are there any declarations of conflicts of interest that need to be declared for decisions? There are none. Don't have a public forum. The first item is then 5.1 and 5. Our meeting held 14th of August. Can I have a mover, please? Deputy Mayor Steve, second. Councillor Steve. This is what you got, Deputy, right? All right.
We just do it to annoy you.
Sorry, I know you did that deliberately. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Can I also have a mover for the minutes held 19th of September? I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Grace. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Our first report, item 6.1, page 14. Thank you, Karen.
Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors, committee members. I will take the report as read and just confirm that we are still working through the audit. We're entering into week 7, and I believe we have another week or 2 to go before getting an audit in. There are 2 material matters that we're working through. One is the investment classification, some of council's investments which have been reclassified, and a material performance measure on the road work on smoothing, which is a wide measure which could result in a qualification of audit. So I'm open to questions on both matters. I think we'll start with the investment item. And if I give a summary?
Perhaps give a summary, yes. Yep.
And take it from there. Council invest, one of their investments is what we call managed funds. And last year the managed funds were 3.6 million, and this year they're valued at 5 million. And as part of those managed funds, one of the investments is with a company called Castle Rock, and that value of that investment is about 927,000. That has been deemed to be a different type of investment to our traditional investments for funds, and it's an equity investment. And because it's in a limited partnership, it requires different classification in the financials. And although it was in last year's financial statements, it wasn't picked up, and it has become a material matter for the audit this year. The type of investment it is and the way that we treat it for accounting purposes.
Any questions on that?
That's a high level summary because it's quite technical.
Yeah. Councillor Dale.
Just a question on audit's role. I always thought audit's role was to check our processes and our the way we operate, not make comment on specific investments or specific detail around what falls out of the policies. Is that correct or not?
Oh, thanks. I can answer that one. So basically the audit is required. There's 3 elements to the audit. One is over the financial statements. Do they comply with financial reporting standards? And that's where the first issue has arisen, that they're saying is because of the type of investment it is, it needs separate disclosure. The other issue is the order of the focus is, do the performance measures reflect what council is required to report on? And that's the road count issue. The other issue is they have got an obligation under the Public Finance Act to ensure that council is complying with legislation. So that's their broad mandate. Sometimes the Office of the Auditor General asks for specific things to be looked at in detail. The issue is for audit, they look at sometimes are the controls in place to protect council funds appropriate? They're not looking for fraud, but are there issues that come to their attention? And one of their issues that they appear to have with this one is this an investment that actually is posing undue risk for the council? Right? But if council has willingly gone into that, knowing the risks, it's not their job to actually comment on policy. Right? There have been many a council in New Zealand that have actually invested in the share market and haven't done that well because of decisions, and also invested offshore, haven't done that well. But that was a conscious decision of council to invest in that type of investment because of their investment strategy. So that's their only mandate.
Yeah, that's what because I know when we set up the investment committee, we went through a process of, and ideally an independent chair, but we couldn't find one. But we set up a committee. We have independent advisors.
Yep.
So I felt we'd covered the
So just for clarification for the rest of the committee, this investment was made before the invest committee was created, Dale. You know that. You were there. This investment was made, passed by resolution at the council on 22nd of August 2002 or August 2002, 2022 in the last triennium. So no one at this committee and no one in the current investment committee had any eye other than those councillors who have returned, yourself, Robin and Brian. No one else has any eyes over. My understanding from Audit New Zealand, they have contacted me specifically around this issue, and we've discussed it this morning, is around the way it's accounted for, the unusual nature of this particular investment, that there are only 2 councils in the country who have such a type of investment. And it's that which is, given that it's public money, ratepayers' money, $1 million, has raised the questions. And from what I've heard from management, they have worked their way through those issues and made the necessary adjustments, but it still will leave a question. And audit have been very clear, it's not for them to judge the quality of the investment. They're not talking about that. They are drawing attention to the unusual nature of it, and I think that is underpinning some of their concerns. And that's matter that the investment committee is going to have to address itself down the line. But what we're interested is that we tick off the box right now, that the accounting, which arguably should have been picked up in the last audit, but it wasn't. Is corrected so that we can move forward. And from my side, I'm confident that management is trying their level best to do that.
Deputy Mayor Steve?
I'm comfortable with
Okay.
what Mayor Ron has just mentioned. That
Yeah, I think we have the investment committee this afternoon where I think we'll go through this in a bit more detail. So we don't want to waste too much time here.
Yeah, thank you.
From a risk and assurance perspective, I've thought about this a bit since yesterday. I don't think we have a financial risk any greater now than we have had for the last 2 years. In fact, it's probably diminishing because not everybody would necessarily know. What we have is an investment in a number of relatively small businesses, all of which are exposed to the New Zealand economy broadly, from retail through personal services, through horse racing, through the construction. And we all think that the economy is likely to improve with interest rates coming down. So all those investments should start to do better. So we probably do face some sort of reputational risk, and that there will be some sort of tag on the and then the annual report.
I would be I would be horrified if we have disclosed the investment appropriately.
Yeah.
What is the role of audit, right? The auditor actually says, do you have the right processes in place, right? And I think this is right. And you're actually, the investment committee, right, needs to actually, providing they go through that and then recommend to council, yes, this is we understand the risk, this is going forward. That's all audit can say. And that's now, I sit on South Taranaki's a risk and assurance committee. They've got as of yesterday, $150 million of funds invested. They use a professional investor because of the size of it. They've got they're going for more higher risk, because they're saying is over a period of time that there will be an increase. The higher the risk, the higher the reward, providing you've got a balanced portfolio. And that's the question I have is part of Castle Rock having a balanced portfolio, and it's part of that investment strategy. That's the question. That's the only question I would have. So that's the question that should be asked of this committee, and has the risks been adequately considered by the investment committee? That's the question I have.
Yeah, and I support you, Mr. Chair, and that what I still don't understand, and I'll be the first to put both hands up and say I don't consider myself to be highly knowledgeable in investment structures, and that's why we lean towards getting independent advice. But I really would like to understand the risk that counts that the investment committee is looking.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand from the investment committee the risk, given that we haven't actually got shares in those those growth funds. We have a partnership agreement with the limited liability company who manages them, and I'm unclear. One, I haven't seen the partnership agreement, and two, I'm unclear as to what the risks are if that limited liability company or its directors get into strife. And that's where if I can have clarity around that risk exposure, and clarity that the investment committee is looking at that and making a good judgment call, then I may have some comfort. But at the moment, I'm extremely uncomfortable with the structure.
All I would say is, look, we just need some clarification. Right? And I think that's right. It might be fine, right? But we, like you, right? We just need that clarification. And I think the other thing too is, why did Ericsson advise us to actually invest it?
Or was that their advice? Because the minutes would suggest we talked about the council back then talked about investing in a growth fund. It did not talk about buying a partnership with a limited liability company.
Let's. I think right. The investment. We don't have the information.
No.
Let the investment committee do their job.
Yeah.
And then if the investment committee can report back to council, and we just note. Right?
Yeah.
But I think that's all we can do.
Because we will have Ericsson's here this afternoon.
Ericsson's have been advised, and through this process, they supported us right at the beginning. They were quite surprised. We have had several meetings with Castle Rock on not just the investment, but the accounting treatment. So they are all quite aware of the level of work that's gone into this classification. And from an annual report perspective, it is about the accounting treatment. It's about resetting the financials for 2 years. It's about disclosing that issue. And so it should not be a qualification or an emphasis of matter. Where it sits right now is it's with Audit's technical team. We've done everything we believe that they needed to get from us, including the PwC report. PwC were also a little surprised at the intensity of the questioning, but they've supported us. So we are just now waiting for audit to confirm that we have published it correctly in the updated annual report, and it means resetting the previous year's accounts. So it's really an accounting matter for the report.
Yeah, I mean, technically, this doesn't, I guess, meet the description under the legislation in terms of how has been classified, but in a practical sense, feels like a managed fund.
Yeah.
I want to know that it is.
Yeah.
And that we're not holding it directly.
Yeah.
We have roughly 1/35 of the overall fund, which is invested in 7 different companies. So
Yeah.
We have no control over the fund.
no,
We don't have a controlling interest, which is where it originally started.
Yeah.
And there was an issue around the type of investment and our controls. So it's been quite a few weeks of investigations and research into the position.
anyway,
Okay, right, move on. Right. Move on.
The other matter that's on the table, I might get my colleague.
Anything else about?
No, I've got a question around the traffic.
Yeah, I'm still confused. But Hannes, thank you. You can sort of talk us through it. Thank you. As best you know how in audit language. I know that.
I thought this,
Come on, you have.
you're the man.
Kia ora, and thank you, Chair and councillors. So this is quite an interesting measure, and in the way that they audited, and I'll try not to be too rude. So the KPI that they're measuring is smooth travel exposure, and that is based on the calculation of the asset data, which considers one of the data sets that it considers is the traffic counts. And so the audit finding has come back, and they've considered that, or they've identified that not all of our roads have been counted in the last 2 years. As Coronis mentioned, that is the same for the whole country, because nobody counts all their roads every 2 years. When I was questioned by audit of why we're not doing this, I said, well, firstly, we follow instruction from NZTA and the Regional Excellence Group of what is best practice. Everybody is almost in the same boat here. There's a cost to putting out traffic counts, and then we don't just do it for the sake of doing it. We try and prioritize our budgets to have a meaningful impact when we spend our budget. So for instance, when you think of pavement designs or seal designs, the area where traffic counts are always considered, and it influences design. Our traffic counts are so low that it really doesn't even move the dial on for most of these roads. It doesn't even meet the thresholds of influencing design. So our minimum designs are normally over and above what you would design for that road, because if you were to design for that road, it will just be a gravel footpath for that traffic volume. So I also raised the question that we get audited by NZTA on our procedure. We get technical audits and procedural audits. Both we pass with flying colours. I think we had a procedural audit last financial year, which they were all happy with, and I think we had a technical audit previous year. So this is quite a bizarre finding, and the fact that they're willing to put a nationwide qualification on that is even more bizarre. If I've also said to them that if they were to, it would have been great if we knew before the financial year started that they would want to test something like this, because then we could go and count every road. But I also question why we would count that just for the sake of having an unqualified audit opinion. when it won't necessarily influence what we're delivering. So yeah, I don't know. It's so strange. I don't even know what to say else about this finding, other than that if this becomes mandatory, then in the future, then we'll obviously have to count every road every 2 years. I'm thinking of dead end gravel roads with less than 100 vehicles a day. Or a year, and how we would use that information. So,
Yeah. So just for clarification, smoothness, nothing to do with potholes.
well, as part of through Reg.
That was supposed to be a joke. You don't know.
No, it's a valid question because through Reg and NZTA we do roughness of our network where we actually measure the actual roughness. But because so audits approach this year, and they haven't asked for this previously, but they've really gone into the detail of all the data that we use and try to validate every data set. So they don't necessarily look at the practicality of what they're asking. They're just saying, this is the data you're using, please validate it. Yeah. So from a pure audit opinion, that's probably I can understand their approach, but practically it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I might talk to you after the meeting. I've just had a brainwave.
Yeah.
All right. I dealt with this else in a previous life, right? And it's about actually control roads, right?
And then just totally unrelated through the work that we've been doing with the Regional Excellence Group, we have engaged a few months ago. We have engaged GHD to develop a traffic counting strategy for us, just so that we can say this is our strategy. Because currently we're doing it on priority roads, and but it's totally separate. But now it is. So in next year we'll have a strategy to deal with it.
And can I just add to that audit have said over recent weeks that the emphasis on our performance measures is just as important on the financial statements. So I think that's a bit of a shift, and that's not how audits used to be quite so measured.
And this is actually, in my opinion, right, a bit bizarre, right? Yes, there is an equal emphasis on performance measures as well as financial. We can understand that. The issue, though, is this is only one measure, right? So they can't give us a qualification. They may say is, because if we say we have failed the measure, yes or no, it's not up to them to say you should have actually done better, right? Right? The issue is, have we actually reported it correctly? And that's the interesting thing is, we could actually say, no, we haven't complied, right? And that would be the end of the matter, right? So I think I've just come up with another idea, which I'll talk to, but more complicated. And I think without speaking ill, right, is sometimes auditors actually lose sight of what their objective is in terms of their role. And sometimes they get a little bit too passionate about what they're trying to understand and really, really say.
Just to note, in that measure, based on the report from RAM, it is actually we're compliant with the KPI. So
right.
So it's not.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, and they're saying, well, you can't prove you're compliant because your road you're not counting every road.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just thinking of risk right now, and the risk I'm thinking about with this road surface smoothness issue that's come up is the perception that's created that we haven't had adequate processes, procedures, the perception that could be created from an audit opinion that's unfavourable in the space that we aren't paying, we aren't applying, we don't have a structured plan and methodology around how we appropriate our funds and how we prioritise specific tasks like road counts against our wider workload within the money we've got. And if I was to think of how I might offset that risk of that perception being created, it might well be that I need to cover it in the mayor's comments in the to the annual report, and that I might need to specifically address that, and I would need your support, Johannes, and wording up. And it might well be that my comments might not sit well with the audit office, but they might need to be taken in order to offset and mitigate the perception
Good idea.
Good idea.
of reputational damage and the reputational damage that might be.
Let's see where we
from
land,
that.
but yes, that's a really good suggestion. Yeah.
I think further to that, I think in terms of the way that we approach infrastructure, we're always prioritizing high utilization. We're always prioritizing high risk. We can't just gold plate everything that we do because we just can't afford it. So whether it's sealing roads, rehabilitating roads, renewing water pipes, it's always through a lens of prioritization.
And funds.
And because of our funds, we have to prioritize. We can't just say, to get a consultant to dream up a strategy and then we go and deliver it without even thinking about what it's going to cost.
And that's theory versus practicality.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'd just like to add too, we have done a lot of extensive work around the water standards issues, which they came out early in the audit, and we were asked to provide a lot more, and we had still complied, but we just had to give further assurance.
Yeah, so another frustrating aspect that was audited, or the requirement of audit, was we provide information from SCADA to Te Mata Arawai, the regulator. We get our quality assurance are done by we test by an independent lab, which verifies that what we're reporting through SCADA is accurate. But we don't input into Te Mata Arawai. Te Mata Arawai, the regulator, are satisfied with what we're presenting to them. The auditors come back, they don't accept that. They want us to pay a professional service advisor to verify that what we've provided to Te Mata Arawai is accurate, which I just can't fathom so then should Te Mata Arawai not be reporting to audit then? Because it's just bizarre, because it's similar to, we're getting audited by NZTA, but then getting audited by audit on what we're reporting to NZTA, where they're all government, and it's just the waste of resources.
Yeah. So we had to commission an independent report with WSB to satisfy Audit New Zealand that we had met the standards, even though we argued the point we have independent assessors. So that was an urgent first audit matter.
What was the cost of that, Carol?
Luckily, it was $7,000, not a lot more than that. I thought it was going to be, and it was super urgent.
They got all the biscuits.
Yeah. Councillor Dow, you had a question?
Yeah, really just following on from all this, how do we as a smaller council manage the risk that the auditing processes put on us? You know, you've just articulated it well, Johannes, that we're being audited by Audit New Zealand on processes that are audited by other departments who give one interpretation, then Audit New Zealand gives another one. And, you know, I see further down the report, the things that we expect from audit, they're tardy on. We're still waiting for the LTP letter. We're still waiting for the invoice so that we can run our business appropriately. And yet things that we don't expect is coming at us after the fact and causing us a lot of staff time, a lot of angst, and as Worship said, potential reputational damage. So how do we, as Carterton District Council, and probably even as a local government sector, because Audit New Zealand put their fees up 40% last year. And yet, I don't know what the ongoing cost to this organisation is trying to run interference with, as you say, new auditors and experienced auditors who come in with a particular point of view. How are we supposed to manage the risk of that this is now presenting? Because it never used to be that way. Audit was a relatively minor conclusion to the business of council. Now it almost seems like it's they come in here for 2 or 3 weeks and they turn the place upside down, and then they come back with a whole lot more please explains. That's a significant imposition on the business.
You're looking for my view. The audit standards have increased dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years. Dramatically. Where it's impacting is in the mid to small size councils. So while the bigger councils such as Wellington and Auckland and Christchurch, they got their processes in place and they can manage it, right? And their audit fees as a percentage of rates are significantly less than ours, right? And I've had some work done for a smallish council, a bit bigger than this, but not dramatic. And their audit fees are within $10,000 of a council twice their size. So it's the smaller councils now being expected by the accounting standards. Now, I'm not blaming audit, right? It's the accounting and auditing standards that require a higher degree of scrutiny that a smaller council is really struggling with. Now, the question I have for the auditing standards people is, your standards are designed for those who are going out to the public to raise specific funds. That's their risk lens. We actually we ask our community for a contribution for the services. It's quite a different process. In fact, the biggest risk for a council is actually getting their rates wrong, right? And funnily enough, the auditors only go so far, but that's another debate. So to me, is the focus on audit for local authorities is actually wrong on the auditing standards, right? And that's what I've seen. For example, this very issue that where this water standard came from, originally it was audited by Ministry of Health. So we would give our sample to Ministry of Health, who would audit it. Audit New Zealand would accept Ministry of Health because they're an independent person. Te Mata Arawai aren't doing an audit, therefore they audit standard requires an independent person to do that audit. Now, I would say that the independent lab is an independent person, but they disagree because there's a...
Tried that.
Right, I know you've tried it. That's so to me is we need some really clarity on the standards, and the other issue is, if you read the Auditor General's report to Parliament, he criticised councils in last year's audits for their water standards falling. Those big headlines. Well, why did the council miss its water standards? 2 reasons. One, the reason we've just talked about is that there wasn't an independent person signing off the standard. So we did actually comply with the water standard, but it wasn't actually audited, therefore we failed. The other one was there was a little bit of wet weather last year. And how many councils across the country failed on their wastewater and their water and their stormwater performance measures because we got a bit damp. I mean, understating a little bit damp. So that to me is also, right? There's no understanding of what's trying to be measured here, and is it really making a difference for the community? Now, the performance measures that we've talked about were written by DIA in about 2014. They're becoming irrelevant the way the world has moved on. So there needs to be, now we've seen that in other councils who are using Palmerston North City Council for their after hours in terms of the complaints. The complaint measure is not providing the right level of information. The response from DIA to a working group was, oh, we don't have the resources to change the measure. We understand it's wrong, but we don't have the resources to change the measure. When the new water entities are stood up, we'll now have the resources to do it. So to me, there's we've got a trifecta of issues that are now coming home to roost, and our ratepayers collectively are paying the bill.
So is that an LGNZ, like on behalf of the sector?
Yes.
It's there.
In fact, I raised this with Mark Maloney at LGNZ conference, and he said, "Oh, yeah, look, I hear you, Philip. I will get you in touch with auditing stand or the XRB, which is the Accounting Standards Board or the Auditing Standards Board, and see if we can get you in front of their technically advisory group." Mark, unfortunately, has just gone off on extended sick leave, so I'll follow that up with his stand-in. But that, to me, is where it needs to be a deliberate.
The pushback.
Well, yeah, no. It's you need to know which buttons to push, right? There's a number of, so that's government with DIA. There's the accounting standards. We need a discussion with the Auditor General as a sector, right?
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Chairman, I think probably the lesson I will take from this is that when we are the very first time we're asked to engage with Audit NZ and the sit down prior to the audit commencing, where we exchange views and opinions, I think what I'd like to see is the letter of instruction from the Office of the Auditor General, the sector, which refers to the sector, and where Audit New Zealand, where they require Audit New Zealand to focus, because every year that instruction does go out. That would enable us to firstly identify not just what Audit New Zealand is going to focus on, but conversely what they have not been specifically instructed to focus on. My concern, and I have no indication as to where the reality is that the question on smoothness of roads and traffic counts, is that just been targeted at us, or is it nationwide across all councils? In which case, if it is, then that's a broader, higher level look that the Office of the Auditor General is trying to get.
Totally,
and we're just part of that.
Yeah. But can I just follow up on your welcome, Councillor Robin? Comment on that sit down with audit in our work plan, in our May meeting, which is well in advance. We've got the dates already there.
Yeah.
We actually, as part of our wrap up with Audit New Zealand, we actually eyeball the engagement letter with all these instructions with the director. So the director physically comes to our meeting in May 2025.
Correct.
That's what you're asking for?
Absolutely.
But when we come to the work program, remind me that we actually add that in.
Let's put that in the minutes.
We'll add it here. I've made a note here, right?
And I'd like to add to that, how do an audit manage late additions to that, which is this is. So this is a qualification nationwide that came out 2 weeks ago. So how are we expected to manage it?
So we need to Mr. Chairman, through you. We need to raise that specific point around unadvised or non-advised to topics that how they will identify them, when they will notify us, and what the process will be to deal with those. So there are no surprises, and it needs to be an audit done on a no surprises basis, where everything is flagged up front, right from the start, and there is no deviation from that.
And prioritised.
But to suggest not that long ago that we have a qualified audit opinion on a matter that is outside our control at this point.
Yeah, I think. Let's not go the, let's see what the review, so what happens when you get an audit opinion that's just non-standard? It's got to go through an OAG formal review committee. So I have actually seen one where the director had recommended a qualification, and it was actually watered down to an emphasis by the committee. So because there's got to be consistency across all opinions. Councillor, so Deputy Mayor Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Johannes, is there any chance that this information or what audit are looking into with the traffic counts and smoothness of roads impact fire rates? Do you see what?
Highly unlikely. I can't see it influencing fire rates, because just with the way that my understanding of how the fire rates are appropriate across the country, it doesn't, unless we're only reporting like 10% of our vehicle numbers or over reporting, there would have to be a significant mistake for it to have bearing on that. But our traffic counts are very in line, because even though we might not have counted every road, we count all our priority roads. So we've got a good understanding of our network, and I don't believe that would have a bearing on the fire rate.
So as a percentage of our performance measure in that way, the ones that we are counting take care of that, and the ones that we're not kind of counting.
Sorry, the question again.
Whether that traffic counts and so forth have been part of our performance measures.
So the smooth travel exposure is a performance measure, and the traffic count is part of the data set that feeds into that calculation. So worst case scenario, if you recount it, and I don't have the mathematics around that equation, but we could go from 98 to 96%.
Right. I think we've probably battered this annual report discussion around. Yeah.
I guess
Sorry, Councillor Grace. Yeah.
I just had a question for you. With the other councils that you deal with, do many deal with other auditors other than Audit New Zealand?
Yes.
Is that a risk to do so?
Well, put it this way. In the last couple of weeks, all my other than Audit New Zealand councils have been signed off.
Yeah.
Without the drama that we've had.
question on the question.
Yeah, question on the question.
Does the Office of the Auditor General demand eyes over those audited?
Correct.
Those
Absolutely.
reports?
Yes.
And so those audit reports produced by other agents,
Yes.
To get
all
audited?
councils, get audited by the Office of the Auditor.
Not audited. So there is a
Reported on.
report on. Absolutely. So if there's basically only two other providers.
Yeah.
So basically the Auditor General appoints Audit New Zealand, Deloitte and EY. So if Deloitte or EY have an issue, then it is escalated through the Office of the Auditor General. If the auditor wants to actually say, I think these guys need a different opinion, a non-standard opinion, that opinion has to go through the Office of the Auditor General. And there is an engagement person in OAG who oversees that. I don't know what their quality assurance process is.
Yeah.
But it's similar to Audit New Zealand.
And are these Deloitte and
EY? Yeah.
Are they having fees that go up 40% each year?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it comes, right?
Just checking.
Yeah, no. This is the issue. It comes down to the auditing standards.
Yeah.
See, the audit, this is what I'm saying, we're
That's
picking,
the one you need to focus
yeah,
on.
it's not, we're not seeing these issues just with Audit New Zealand on fees. I've seen them with EY and Deloitte's because of the auditing standards. And dare I say it, the price escalation and the scarcity of people who want to be auditors anymore, right? Once upon a time, people did want to be auditors. Now they don't, right? Yeah, well, let's not go there, Your Worship, but each to their own, right? But that's, so to me, yes, generally there has been a catch up. But my view of both, I'm going to be careful, no, I won't say it, I'll say it elsewhere. So I'll say it in public excluded, okay?
Sorry, one more question.
Well, one more question, yeah.
For council to consider a decision around changing providers, is that something that management would suggest to council, or it would be something that we'd have to initiate? Like, I just wonder whether that conversation would ever happen.
It does happen. So what would happen, right, if I can lead in, basically the council would have to say is well satisfied with the current provider, and that goes to the Office of the Auditor General, and to say with the reasons for the dissatisfaction. I have seen this happen once, but there was only a change in director. The council still had Audit New Zealand. Right? So be careful what you wish for, right?
Still has to be approved by the OAG.
It's basically the OAG actually officially appoints, right? Now, interestingly, a long time ago, 30 years ago, the council used to have the ability to go out for tender for the audit provider. However, there was the tender process. There were 3 people on the tender process. Someone from Office of the Auditor General, so 1 person from council, and an independent person. So the Audit New Zealand and the other providers would put in their bids that would be evaluated by those 3 people, and those 3 people on behalf of the council would make the decision. Right? So the council, because of the Public Finance Act, can't appoint the auditor. The same applies to Air New Zealand. Yeah. Air New Zealand, although they've got their own board of directors, normally a board of directors will actually appoint the auditor. The Office of the Auditor General appoint the auditor for Air New Zealand because it's technically it's a state-owned enterprise. So that's just a little bit of Public Finance Act 101 for everybody. But good questions, thank you. Any more questions on the annual report? I just want to sort of move this on because
Can I just raise a flag, and it's off agenda, so I don't think we can, but because there's been a lot of discussion around water quality and the risk and the issues around that, we have had, I just want to signal, we've had a recent email around a report that potentially exposes our council with a lot of other councils to reputational risk. And at what stage are we going to have to, or what stage would we be able to look at that issue?
I'm not aware of that.
Well, maybe Johannes can inform him.
So we received the intention of a media release planned for tomorrow about research that was done by the University of Canterbury, and basically it talks to the media release talks to the condition of New Zealand's water pipe infrastructure, and it just puts out this is how bad everything is. So it paints a pretty dim picture of New Zealand as a whole, and obviously Carterton is referenced in that. So they're listing all the councils and where the condition of their assets sit, which is a bit strange and a bit out of context. In March we received a Lagoima request on information for a research that was focused on health studies, which relates to assets. So we provided that asset information. But then also so we did provide information to the health research. This media release seems to have a different focus to what that study is, just at a glance. But then also the information that they are reporting on is publicly available information that's accurate and aligns with our asset management plan. I think I share the risk where in that context, it might be received poorly by the community, where if you take it in the context of our asset management plan, we are aware that this is our state and we've got an intervention strategy of how we're dealing with it and how we're funding it through our LTP and how over the next 10 years we will go from a 36% poor condition to 26%. So there's probably just a risk of public perception of how that is received. And I think that we received that media update yesterday. So
out of the blue. And I think it's just a case of flagging to the Risk and Assurance Committee that this issue has just emerged. It presents reputational risk because the report does not have context. And we are just one of all the councils. And I guess leaves me puzzled as to why it has a surreptitious flavour around how they accessed the information, what the stated purpose was, and now the revelation of what the report actually is about, which has nothing to do with that, but it generally paints a very, very bad picture, and we're lumped in that. It doesn't take into context at all what our long-term plan will deliver in 10 years' time. So it's a difficult situation where we stand to get painted up poorly, and we have and we need to offset that.
So just to add to that, I am in the process of drafting an email that goes to councillors with the media release that's planning to go out, but also the reference to the Lagoima request as well as our asset management plan on a page to just give some context of where we're at as well. So,
okay. All right, thank you for that, I think.
Yeah, the sector is aware of it. LGNZ had a conversation with them last night, and they are equally as concerned about reputational damage to all councils. Given the way in which this report has been put together and suddenly out of the blue without any warning put up as a press release, which was intended to go out today. Tomorrow now. So it was today. LGNZ negotiated another 24 hours.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So if we go right, and anything further on, thank you for that. No problem on that one.
Sorry, no, you didn't need it, but yeah.
No, it's all right. Maybe we should have actually had a report on emerging risks. That would have been a good one to actually have on there. Anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We'll do that in the future.
Yeah, please.
Anything further on the annual report? So we've got a recommendation there on page 16. We received the report. Can I have a mover? Councillor Grace, seconded. Deputy Mayor Steve. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, Karen. Next item 6.2, emergency management update. We'll take the report as read. Thank you, Jerry. Any further information or key highlights you want to bring to the committee's attention?
Tēnā koutou katoa. This has been a year since the last EM update for the committee, just in terms of relation to the mitigations we've got in place. Mark Duncan is online from Remo, who's been leading work in the assurance and continuous improvement space. And I'll give Mark a moment to talk about some of that high level across the region that Remo have been leading. Also to acknowledge the work that Remo do in this space for us. This highlighted in the report, the very minimal contribution actually that we make in terms of the wider cost of providing that service across the whole Wellington region. So for us, it is really valuable. A, contribution that we provide for that service, but B, the quality and the assurance that we get from having that, being part of that wider. Just step one, I guess just one thing I will note before Mark talks about the review, the assessment review. is there's been a lot happening in the 12 months since we've sat down to talk about a massive amount, trying to highlight or capture that across. So there's quite a bit in the report that is at a high level, a summary level, and there's lots of work that's sort of underneath all of this. It's really pleasing that as a region, so for Wairarapa region, the four councils, predominantly the three councils, are supporting. We've been doing a lot in this space and acknowledging with our EOC exercise last Thursday, 30% of the staff were new to the EOC. So we've been building a lot in the capacity space. So the numbers, and you'll see the table in there represents sort of the numbers of staff that are being brought into the space. But where the risk is at the moment is getting those people trained and exercised and competent into those higher levels. So that's the space that we need to push a lot of those new people through to become competent. So that is one of the current risks that we've got, is just moving those people into competency. For us as CDC, we've got some risks that have highlighted around our internal focus and capacity. So we've been working a lot with Remo and regionally across Wairarapa to set up the framework and the system at that level. Our next focus should be internally around our CDC practices and really at the ground level of our SOPs. So do staff on the grounds or at the water treatment plant, have they been practiced and do they know what they're doing? So I'm really keen to have a focus over the next while internally on our systems. You'll see the BCP, the Business Continuity Plan. As we've been reviewing that, we've really come to understand that it's trying to achieve a couple of things within the one plan. So we're splitting that out into actual business continuity, and that's for any disruption that we might experience, but also really developing that crisis management plan, which is what we've tried to encapsulate in the business continuity. But actually, we need to understand and practice where events start at a lower level. So we might experience flooding at a CDC level. That's business as usual, really, to a point. And where does that point escalate into becoming more widespread? Where does it escalate? And what's the trigger point for the EOC to be involved, or for a regional response across Wellington? So, yeah, that's more the detail and nitty-gritties of that. But if I can pass to Mark, he'll just give an overview of that work that he's been leading regionally, and then we can go for questions. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Jerry. I'll just check my audio is working.
Yeah, thank you. We can hear you nice and clear. Thanks, Mark.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Thanks very much for having me. As Jerry mentioned, I work regionally at the Wellington Regional Emergency Management Office. And I guess I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of where this assessment's come from, and then really happy to take any questions and just support any further discussion that Jerry's leading. I guess just to track back around 10 to 15 years ago, the former Ministry of Civil Defence and Emergency Management used to come and do assessments like this across the country. So we've had a couple of assessments done previously as a region. In around, I think the last one was 2015, they basically put that into abeyance and it's been on pause. So it left a bit of a gap in terms of assessing the capability and capacity of the emergency management system. At around 2019, the Office of the Auditor General had a look at Auckland Council's preparedness, and one of the key findings from that assessment was that we just weren't doing a very good job at providing that performance information to governance so that you were all well informed about what the system could do and what it couldn't. So we took note of that report, and this is our, I guess, first attempt to try and do that at a regional level to fill that gap, with the overarching goal, I suppose, of just being clearer with governance and with the community and with ourselves about what the system can deliver and what it can't, and also then to focus those available resources on the areas we think are going to give the best return is kind of one of the overarching goals of this program. So it's really great. This is the first council committee, I think, in the region that's received this report. We really welcome feedback about whether it's meeting your needs, because it is kind of designed to try and support discussions through governance right down to the operational level. And it's something we're going to hopefully refine and continue to do on an annual basis so we can track trends, whether those interventions and investments and effort are leading to better performance of the system, I suppose, broadly. So regionally wise, what this sort of assessment's told us across all councils is that we've probably got a basic system using an internationally recognised capability maturity model. broadly speaking, in those most likely sort of severe weather events we face fairly frequently, most councils are doing a pretty good job at responding in that sort of space. But when we start escalating into things like a Cyclone Gabriel type event or a more severe event, there's a fair bit of risk and uncertainty about how the system will perform under those sort of conditions, I guess, at a high level. That kind of summarises where the system's at across the region. But yeah, really welcome any other questions or points.
Thanks, Mark. Are there any questions from the committee, either for Mark or for Jerry? Yeah, Deputy Mayor Steve.
Chair. On page 19, I think it is, Jerry, just under, you're talking about the assessments. I'm just curious that it's mentioned the community preparedness, and I mean, the percentages in there are good. I'm curious whether you have data there which shows high decile, low decile areas, because the 80% of survey respondents indicated they had enough food to last for 7 days, but it would be interesting to know whether what percentage are lower. So is the 20% that missing, is it lower decile areas? That I'm just curious.
Yeah, good question. And maybe that's something Mark can talk to around the stats that feed into that.
Sure, I can shed a little bit of light on that. So that the results of that survey is from June 2023. Remo, on behalf of Council's commission, a company to do a survey across, I think it's a 2,000 person sample, so a fairly decent sample size. And what we've tried to do now is extrapolate that regional data down to local level. So that's Carterton, or that's Wairarapa specific data. Within that, we do have some, I believe there's some things around ethnicity and sort of age brackets that gives you a little bit more granularity. I'm not sure the exact level of granularity you get down to in terms of your question, so it's something we can follow up on and give some more granularity to Jerry if that helps.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah. And I think we can recognise that, I guess, across the board socially, those in vulnerable or socioeconomic households that are lower will struggle with having enough food prepared, stocked away somewhere, having the water supply, having those things as a general social issue across the board. Where we've tried to support that is in the water tanks locally that we've done the last 2 years, the last year and this year, around those giveaways for community services cards. So, yeah, I think across the board there's a recognition that that's likely to be, and I think Christchurch, Mark might correct me if I'm wrong, Christchurch highlighted some of the more vulnerable areas, but particularly sitting in those spaces. So, yeah, I think that's a good place for where our neighbourhood support. So not just, I guess, in the elderly range as well, in terms of being vulnerable. Yeah, we've got some really good focus areas to do there.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you. Jerry, I don't know whether you or Mark can answer this. Once again, in the report on page 20, the key area of risks and weaknesses. Just looking at the official warnings, and statement there, 49.5% of the survey respondents expect a text alert. Expecting it may not happen, and also I'm sort of concerned that the people out on the coast that aren't in coverage. I think there's more work need to be done in that area, and I also acknowledge your limited capability and capacity to develop new strategies, etc.
Is that one for you, Mark?
Well, yeah, that's a really good pickup, and it's something that we grapple with significantly. On the one hand, we've got this fantastic emergency mobile alerting capability that's really useful in a range of scenarios, but in some settings like the Wairarapa with limited cell coverage, it can create a dependency. So I guess the mitigations we've applied for that is we're actually very, very careful in our region of when we do use the emergency mobile alerting platform. We get quite frequent requests from different agencies to send those text alerts out. And we've frequently said no, because we're trying to preserve that tool for when we really need it the most. And I guess the main mitigation, especially for your coastal communities, is that self-awareness. So people understanding that long or strong get gone message and taking that action themselves, recognising that text alert might not come for those really severe events, and particularly where there's no coverage. So I think it's interesting in the statistics. I think for the Wairarapa, you've got some relatively good awareness of that long or strong get gone message, but it's counteracted a little bit by that increasing dependency on emergency mobile alerts. So yeah, we're trying to mitigate, and we're very cautious with that regionally. The other ongoing conversation is always with the National Emergency Management Agency, because they can also send out those emergency mobile alerts over the top of us if they feel like it's justified. So it's a live topic, and it's quite a tricky one that we're definitely paying attention to and mitigating as best we can at the moment.
And the comms discussion around the reliability of comms is definitely something that's been picked up in the recovery resilience work that the recovery office are leading as well, in terms of engaging with coastal communities in particular to put in place some tools and some Skylink or some actual communication connections that will improve the quality and the reliability.
Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
I just had one point. I really enjoyed reading through the report. There was heaps of information in there. My only feedback would be it'd be kind of helpful if the scoring guide chart could be at the start of the report, so you know where the ad hoc sits within the scale of results.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor.
Just on page 25, we've got this expected staff numbers and actuals. I'm looking at controller, where your regional target is 7, regional actual is 1, who's on CDC. So who is that? Congratulations.
So I know Mike might talk to this a bit better. We do have a number of controllers that can fulfil the controller function, but are not assessed as having the competency or the qualification. But in that case, another advantage of REMOs, we have group controllers that can sit across and provide that support and advice. Okay, so there's 3 controllers working towards that qualification. But yeah, it has been an area of also the reliability, something we're working on at the moment. In the past, we've relied heavily on one controller to pretty much be on call 24/7, with alternate controllers like Sol, as and when they might go away. We're in the process of developing a more reliable week roster of week on competent, trained, qualified controllers in that space.
Because that's what, I mean, if the controller is in control, and we have one and she's at a dog show something.
Or they're having puppies. I mean, another of the recommendations is really around the professionalisation at a local level of emergency management. So recognising our people in the EOC, and particularly our function leaders, need to be leaders in themselves. So in their BAU, they have those leadership qualities. They are competent in leading people. They can work under pressure and crisis. In the past, we haven't committed, I would say, a real honesty or commitment to emergency management. So we've gathered the bums on seats, and we've had enough to fill, for this period. And Mark talked about covering a short period of time, and we've been okay at that. But the events and the reviews and reports that have come out are really highlighting to us we need to be more serious and committed about the quality and the capability of the people that are delivering this. And then that's in fairness to themselves as well, because we've seen out of Hawke's Bay, we've put people in roles that they haven't really been prepared for, and it's affected, them personally, but also, that hasn't delivered for the council or the community in a way that it needs to. So that, again, through a number of those. So with this, but our Wairarapa assessment that the 3 councils are doing, is actually with the control roles, they should be paid an on-call allowance to be on call and available. That also compensates them for over and beyond BAU work that they do, because there is significant training, knowledge that goes alongside being able to do those jobs as well.
Okay. Councillor Bryan.
I've got one more. On page 24, there's the third to last paragraph. Of particular interest to CDC and Wairarapa councils will be the government's aim to support and enable local government to deliver EM. We look forward to further advice on how this will be achieved. Is that mean more personnel training or more personnel as Jerry's just alluded to, we're a little bit short on the ground there. And if it is there funding available for that?
This is very new out. I don't know if Mark's got more to add to. It's pretty much a wait and see what we're going to see out of this. There's some indications, that local government will be doing more, and I think one of the highlights we had as a region is Remo does sit in, at the top, if not very close to, in terms of CDM group leadership. So Remo has led a lot, and that includes at a national level, so influencing or picking up where NEMA might be struggling or challenged to deliver. Some of the things that we've been doing are ahead of that game. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. And Mark, you might have more to add to what comes out of this latest inquiry findings.
I think that particular, I guess, from that inquiry and the summary on the page you're mentioning, the good signal that came from government was that they did really want to commit to locally led emergency management. There was a few questions about whether that was going to continue to be the model going forward. So getting some clarity that that locally led sort of emergency management system was still the principle of what they were trying to design was really promising. There's still a lot of uncertainty about, there's been no real budget or money committed from what I've seen at the national level to lift the system. And I guess we're awaiting more information from NEMA on that front. The other opportunities, though, to flag is literally today in Wellington, all of the other CDM group managers from across the country are getting together, the 16 civil defence emergency management groups. And there's a real desire amongst those groups that, depending on where NEMA heads, we should be collaborating a lot more across regions. We probably duplicate and don't coordinate our effort enough to make use of the good ideas and resources that are out there. So there is a real opportunity to sort of work with those other regions, north, south and around us, as another way to lift the system. And that's being discussed over the literally right now in Wellington. And hopefully at the end of that meeting, they'll get a little bit more out of NEMA in terms of where things might track as a broader system going forward. But a little bit unclear at the moment on that particular front.
Okay. Thanks. I've got Councillor Robin, the Mayor, and then Councillor Lowe.
Mine, I had a similar question on exactly that point that Councillor Della's raised, sort of really a comment. And I hope that local TAs are not expected to pick up the costs of all of this additional. So I don't know if that's something that Mark can pass on, because TAs don't have it in their budgets, as well as they don't have the staff. So it was just a follow on for that. The other question I had was on page 22, Jerry, and it's around the business continuity plan. And I know that I raised this at a previous risk and assurance meeting. Is that an internal review, or are you getting any? It is. So
we're starting with an internal review. So as we've started, we've found that issue around, actually we're trying to use this to cover a couple of bases, which is not working. Also working with Simon Taylor at the Recovery Office. So he's been doing a bit of work on BCPs, following on from sort of lessons learned, best practice, what looks good. So he's got a whole lot of resources. So we will use external resources as well to develop both that and our crisis management plan.
Cool, because there's some really good stuff out there with BCPs. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Got me wrong?
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you. It's fine.
Just a couple of little questions. When we look at the controller and other important roles like that, are we taking into account where they are located, as in where they live? So when the British come and by the way?
Yes. So we've actually got an alternate controller that lives over the hill. So whether they can be joining on the spot. Yes, ideally they are in proximity of the EOC, so they can physically get there. We have also practiced and trained and can work remotely if needed, provided the comms are up as well. So there's a degree of that, but ideally they are within, cooey of the EOC in a physical sense. That's not to say that we can't also move the EOC. So we can move because, we're separated by rivers. So the expectation is Marston would have 2 controllers, council, and we would have, South would have at least 1. But, the on-controller may be in Carterton, stuck between 2 rivers, not being able to go anywhere. So, there is cascading fallback. So if they literally couldn't function, there are others that would be at the EOC that could step into that role, ideally. And I guess a backstop is we always have a Remo response manager as part of that, as a advisor or an assistant that could step into that role as well as the group region. Yeah, but ideally, yes, they're on hand to the EOC. They can be there and visit in a couple of minutes.
Deputy Mayor Steve, you had a comment? Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or a question for Philip. I'm just wondering about the financial risk to council if of Remo's cross-subsidisation model being questioned if all three Wairarapa councils choose to exit the Wellington regional model of the local audit umbrella.
No.
If they choose to exit local audit as well.
Yes.
Well,
The Wellington model.
the dynamics of it.
I think that would remain quite separate in terms of a Remo agreement, emergency agreement versus, you think we might burn our bridges relationship wise and no one wants.
Well, it's interesting what goes on between our three councils just over here.
And there is, certainly we are committed to being part of Remo and we've received that commitment back relationally as well.
Could I put the risk question slightly differently? That's interesting. How secure is the funding arrangement right now, given that we're already witnessing certain councils making changes to joint shared funding agreements, contracts in other spaces? How tight is this funding agreement right now? And does it need an eye over to ensure that we're protected? We'll currently fund on a per capita basis, and there are increasing challenges to that agreement in other areas. I'd hate to think we get hit here as well.
And ultimately the risk is, if worst case scenario, if the Remo joint agreement fell apart and we couldn't take advantage of that, we would have a legislative obligation to be still delivering CDM activities. That would end up costing us more in terms of having to, as a single council, to then deliver on those obligations. So
I guess the question I have is, are councils who are part of this joint agreement able, under the current agreement, to change their mind and reduce their level of contribution? And how do we fix that if that is the case?
They're able at the moment. Everyone is locked into. So there is the 10-year agreement, and there is a 3-year withdrawal from that agreement. So funding wise, there would be a heads up if there was change to that financially for us. Outside of that, we have had this discussion in terms of Remo supporting us if we were by ourselves. They have committed to being that partner and supporting us to do that. For our end, we acknowledge we can't afford or wouldn't have the capacity to fulfill those obligations on our own as a single council at the moment. So I personally, I'm quite assured in terms of that security around that support from Remo. The other, the Wellington councils are very strongly committed to being part of that agreement. Masterton and South, as part of our review that we're doing locally, which encompasses that controller review and our local systems, we're looking at ensuring that we've got best value for money. We're convinced that we have as CDC, in terms of Remo.
Thank you. Are there any other? You want 2 questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry, on page 50 under the Wairarapa assessment page, it states encourage all CDM stakeholders to reduce the risks of hazards to acceptable levels. I'm just wondering whether that point can be included under the Wairarapa review. I know it's significant for Carterton now with the Mangatere flood mapping and so forth, and how many residents it could potentially impact. That should be included in the review.
Absolutely. I think what's great about this specific Wairarapa review, it gives us that high level regional, but the say it is very new, and we're really keen to pick out specific issues for Carterton that we can do to address that. So we know as a small council, and I think we talked about this just earlier, is the reliance on community to play a part in a lot of what we do. So our relationships locally with not the community and residents particularly, but also our services locally like FENS as well. So really important that we can all play. We have we meet regionally in emergency services Wairarapa meeting, but we actually don't have a specifically local Carterton group like that as yet. So it's more at a regional level because of FENS resources, for example, or police. But almost a stakeholder group or something like that actually we can talk about shared responsibility locally and risks and issues. But,
Thank you. One question that I've got, and it's probably a bit of a beast, right? But Mark, in terms of Remo, in terms of bums on seats on this side of the hill, how many, what support have you got over it? Right? I'm just conscious that there've been a number of disasters of recent times where community has been seriously isolated for quite some considerable time, thinking of Karakia and Wairarapa are the two ones that unfortunately I've had a little bit of experience on both of those. Want to comment on, neither of those communities could actually function well without our wider support. And I just wonder if we had something like Gabrielle that Hawke's Bay had, here, I would imagine the Rimatukas would be closed and so would Mount Bruce, and you'd be isolated for quite some considerable time. Just whether you want to comment on that.
Sure, I could provide a few thoughts. I guess there's quite a few scenarios that predict that the Wairarapa could become isolated, whether it's severe weather or a seismic event, for instance.
Yep.
And that's where I guess the main way we think about that, and this is part of that expectation management piece, is we can't always promise, to the earlier point about a controller being handy, that the formal civil defence system is going to stand up and be available within the first few hours. That's why that community preparedness, community resilience is so important. In Wellington, for a long time, we've been promoting communities being self-sufficient for 7 days, whereas the rest of the country historically was in the 3-day mark, and that's just shifted off the back of the recent weather events. So obviously that the work to really prepare the communities done before the event, that's where Remo worked within. There's some good examples in Jerry's report of the people within Carterton District Council they partner with. In terms of like a physical footprint, if that was part of your question.
It was,
we've got, so there's 2 Remo advisors that live over in the Wairarapa day to day. There's also actually staff from other councils. For instance, there's actually a local controller from Porirua City that lives in Featherston. So we do have a broad awareness of where different people right across the region sort of reside. We pay attention to it to a point, but we also accept just that from a probability perspective, there are times when people might not physically be in your particular area. And that's just a case of then having to work through getting the right people into the right place. Right now in the room next to me, there's about 40 emergency management people from across the region, FENS, police, controllers, because we have a meeting quarterly as an example. So there's definitely, I'd like to think always going to be a handful of people that are in the Wairarapa that can get the machine moving, so to speak. But equally, we'd be looking really quickly to get the right people into the right place if they're not physically there at that point in time.
Yeah. Look. I know Karakia, right? It is public knowledge, right, that the entire senior management team for Karakia District Council, as well as all the councils, were actually out of district when they had their Christchurch earthquake, and were actually flown in by helicopter, right, the following morning, right? So again, that, and I think that's, I like your idea of you've got to be self-sufficient for, 7 days, but you can't expect civil defence to stand up the minute there is a flood, right? You've got to have your own preparedness plan, because that, some of these things happen unexpectedly, and it takes often 24 hours before the actual system can actually get going.
And particularly where a lot of the people that we depend on are often impacted themselves, and that's the importance of working with other CDM groups too, where we have reciprocal arrangements. So we might be bringing in staff from, say, Hawke's Bay to help us out. We went up and helped out Hawke's Bay in their event, so that those people impacted themselves have a little bit of breathing room to look after themselves and their families. And quite important for this group too is small things like when the mayor does go out of district, obviously putting in place that delegation, so there are still elected officials and decision makers there to guide their communities as well, is a really important part of the system.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. All right, looks like we're on the right track. Jerry, are you going to report on an ongoing or on a regular basis of how we're actually tracking?
Yes.
And when are we going to get the next report? Just in 12 months?
if not before.
If
I,
not,
I was thinking you're probably twice yearly.
twice yearly, thank you. Thanks, Mark. I think you've probably got another meeting to get to, which is probably just as important, if not more important, is it? If your other, well, no, with the fact that the meeting with the other, maybe get some funding from Nima would be tongue in cheek. All right.
Well, I wish that was the case. Thank you very much for having me. Have a great rest of the day.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. So we've got a recommendation there at the bottom of the report. Can I have a mover, please? Deputy Mayor Steve, do I have a seconder? Councillor Grace, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Our next item is 6.3, health and safety.
So again, our regular reports, I would probably highlight so that we're pleased to see an improvement in the adverse behaviour.
Yep.
In terms of staff are encountering that we've had. We are suspicious of some underreporting that we're investigating, and we're noting that there's been a spike in vehicle speed recently, which we're managing with staff.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Grace?
Mine was with regards to the speed monitoring issue. One was there was a graph saying 20 k's over the 21 to 30 k's over the limit. Was that within a 50 k zone? Wasn't in 100?
I don't have that right in front of me. I would say that it's in the 100 k zone. I'm listening to Jody, but yeah, sorry, it's in the data. But it's usually in the 100 k area. Mostly where we see the speeds are those change of zone. So particularly on the edges of Carterton, when we're coming from rural down into 50 k area.
Yeah.
And that's most of the time it's not like they're speeding through the middle of town.
Yeah.
So confident about that. Yeah.
And what's the process if it continues to happen? Is there a warning and a notice and all that sort of thing?
Process. Yeah. Yes. I think I did note in here. So the speed count or numbers can be triggered by one single journey. So on a number of times. So one of these was a particularly long journey out of the area, and where there's been some recent speed changes. But no, there is triggers to pull to reverse.
Okay. Any other questions? Jerry, my favourite subject on page 68. Sorry?
Factors?
No.
Steve's favourite.
Oh.
Next favourite, right?
Yes.
Near miss reporting. We seem to be, excuse the pun, missing a few in September and October. Is that your underreporting you're referring to?
Correct. Yeah. It is really concerning. So we would just say underreporting, but when we're underreporting near misses and we're only reporting things that actually happen, there's a whole lot missing there. So there's a focus to be investigated, yes.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right. So we've got a recommendation there that we receive the report. Can I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Steve, second to Councillor Grace. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Now I'm going to change the order slightly. And we can move, because I wanted to come back and do the last thing is the work plan, because there might be items coming out of the last two items, additional items, and then we'll come back to the work plan. So first one, 6.5 insurance update. Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Late report. Late all the information during the audit. I'll take it the report as read, and we tried to expand on the report a little bit more this year than last year, and just highlight some of the different types of insurance, obviously, and some of the challenges that we're facing in the whole insurance market. So, the cost of insurance has significantly increased year on year by 44%. And I think the last couple of years it was around 30%, 33%. One of the reasons for the costs increasing is the international markets changing. It's harder to get insurance. And also we've increased the value of some of our assets to insure. So it's a quite a dynamic, complex market and not easy to get insurance.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Gray.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. That's a horrible report. I found that.
Thank you.
I found that, no, not in terms of your right, in terms of the information, I just thought,
Scary.
yeah, really scary, really interesting to have that breakdown of all the different line items of whether I don't, big numbers. In terms of council's risk, what are the risks in us reevaluating what we are insuring? And is that something that we should be looking at? Because that's a big number. And I don't know, personally, I find insurance is the reason they have the biggest buildings in every city because they make a lot of money. And it seems like we've got, I wonder if there are some things that we're insuring at the moment that maybe we don't need to be.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Okay.
I think why I wanted to move the work program to the last item, I think it's really important and we actually have an insurance dedicated workshop, whether it's a tack on to a meeting or a separate day early in the new year to actually do a really deep dive into our insurance. But before we actually have that, what we're talking about is our risk appetite.
Yeah.
So we probably need a bit more of a workshop on risk appetite, because then you actually say, this is how much risk we're willing to take it at the holistic level. And then you can test that of about, well, okay, now you've got your insurance. How much do you want to insure? And all you're doing with insurance is actually protecting your financial loss. So if the office building was to somehow implode, right, with hopefully no one in it, right, it's not only the cost of reinstatement, but it's the cost of actually finding alternatives, right? The ongoing costs, the cost and staff of actually having to manage that, right? So to me, I think that's a wider discussion about what is our risk appetite, and then how much are we willing to pay to mitigate the financial impact, and I think that would be
Really useful.
Really useful, because my experience is that the community expect, if you've got a building, that they will actually expect it to be replaced, even if it's only used 4 times a year. So it's about having that conversation with the council to start with, and then with the community.
Yeah.
Councillor Dale.
Yeah, just following on from that, I mean, there's a few glaring examples of that in the report. And it's almost like we need a trigger that if a property is going to be disposed of, like Holloway Street or some of our halls that are going through a process, that should then trigger a look into the realistic value. I mean, Holloway Street, it's on the market for a third of that.
Yeah.
And you know, and yet it's $5,000 a year to insure. And we've all talked about that probably the best thing to do with it is to bulldoze it. So, you know, yet we're insuring it for the best part of $1 million. So, but I'm not just using that as an example. And we're going through a process with a hall to dispose of, you know, when it hits that, when council makes a decision to dispose of property, then the conversation should happen at the same time as around what is our risk, what is our intent, and what should we be covering? Because in some cases, it would be nothing.
Absolutely.
I would have thought.
Correct. Yep.
Because it's land value and you can't insure land. So.
Yep.
Just following on, I see the same thing with the event centre. I mean, it's one of the first earthquake. Well, it's one of the best earthquake strengthened buildings in the Wairarapa. And it has up to date fire extinguisher systems in it. So there's got to be a lowering of the risk
Yeah.
for anything to happen to that
Yeah.
building.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I see they're looking at the event centre just the same as looking at a piece of land or Holloway Street.
That'd be this whole building, would it not? The event centre would be this whole complex.
Yeah.
Would it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I mean, there's all sorts of things I think we need to consider. I think we just say, this is what we've got, right? But agreeing totally with Councillor Grace, we actually need a plan to move forward.
My one other question was with regards to council's obligations and responsibilities, government legislation around insurance. I'm guessing there's some sort of, you have to have a bare minimum on XYZ or no? Okay.
The only criteria you have on insurance is you've for the 60/40, you've got to make adequate provision. So if you are lucky enough and you've got lots of cash, you can actually self-insure. No one's doing that to the nth degree, but again, it's that trade-off.
Yeah.
The other risk, I think we haven't talked about it, and what we have in the report is public liability. You know, how much, unfortunately, this is public liability or public indemnity is becoming really problematic because councils are the last man standing, right? And we can't legislatively excuse ourselves from that liability, but the risk is that we may not get insurance for it. So therefore the ratepayer is going to have to pay for it. Right? And it's quite a scary number. Right? And I know better be careful what I say here. If Masterton Hospital had been successful for the $90 million of the new hospital, they wouldn't have had that amount of cover in the insurance policy. So what would have actually happened? Would the Ministry of Health then sued the people of Masterton for a new hospital? But that's right. Now that's an extreme case that never actually, the liability was never settled. But that's what they're asking, and that's the problem we're actually got as a sector. Now I understand it with a homeowner because generally they don't actually have a lot of money. And if something does go wrong, and there's a building consent, but you've got commercial organisations with deeper pockets than councils going for councils. Right? And I can quote more, right? So to me, we need to actually unpick all that and understand that as part of that workshop.
Because we've got a situation where our public liability cover has decreased by a third and gone up 3 times.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. Yep. And it may not exist. Now, some people remember an organisation called Risk Pool. Right? The reason Risk Pool was created is in the early 90s, that liability insurance was not available in New Zealand. The insurers all walked away. So, it comes in cycles. So how do we actually manage that cycle that's cost effective for our ratepayer, but reducing our risk or identifying our risk? Yep.
Just with what Steve mentioned just before, the public liability, are we missing a zero or has that actually dropped a lot more than a third?
I think it's probably 200 million.
200.
Yeah, as opposed to 20.
Yeah.
On page 5.
No, 20. I think it might be 20. It's
20. It is 20.
It's 20 for one event.
It's dropped from 300 million down to 20 million.
One event.
Check, but I'm pretty.
I just assumed it was
No.
and the premium's gone up 3 times.
This was one of the areas we struggled. And bearing in mind, this is a Wairarapa group coverage, so it's the other 2 councils. So we all go shopping together for this coverage. So the others be in the same position.
Okay. Councillor Darling, Councillor Bryan.
Just in terms on page 9 under financial impact, we've got a shortfall in budget of 3%. I know this is risk and assurance, not council, but is the intent to trim back those premiums to meet budget, or is the expectation to find the budget?
The expectation will be to find the budget because you can't trim back the premiums, they've been set. And a 3% variance is not significant to the annual plan, and there'll probably be savings elsewhere,
Hopefully.
The challenge will be setting the annual plan
Yeah.
and the premiums
Mhm.
higher than we anticipated. And one of the challenges around the LTP was the assurance assumptions. I think I built in 30%. And audit were very questioning on that assumption, and it was just based on market information. So that's already out of date. So I expect the LTP will be out of date. So normally for a variance, 5% of
Yeah.
the threshold to bring it council from budgeted.
That actually feels pretty good to me, considering.
Wasn't a bad estimate.
Right.
You're on, yeah.
Keep my expenditure to 3% of budget. Right.
Did you have?
Any further discussion on the, sorry, Councillor Bryan, my apologies.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I'm looking forward to a review, and I think we need to pick this to pieces. But one other question I have is the use of, or do we tender out interest for brokers, or do we just use Marsh as such? I think it's probably important that we might get better deals from other brokers. I don't know.
A good question. Just at the 11th hour before the LTP and the insurance premiums were being finalised, South Wairarapa wanted to go to market and find a different insurance broker because we couldn't get liability. And that was the one piece of the puzzle missing. But our insurance broker, Marsh, were testing the market equally as any other broker would have. So it wasn't an issue with the broker, it was the market.
Yeah.
And so we pushed back on South Y that this was not the time to enter into a review of the insurance broker, and that would require a full procurement process to go to market to test that. So that could be part of the review. However, it does involve the other two councils.
Yeah. Okay.
Because all insurance brokers are going to the state market.
Yeah.
Just who you choose to do it for.
And it's that relationship with the market as well, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, conflict of interest declared, right? I got an Aon here, okay? Because, Aon have got the share of the market, and we do see Aon from time to time. And, this is just to reinforce what Karen has said. Both Marsh and Aon, both of them have advantages and disadvantages, and I think it would be timely in due course. Right? It may not be next year, it might be the year after, because it is a long time. It's a big job to go out for market because it's about the relationship. Yep.
And did you say earlier there was a council going out to market or in the process, and it was 18 months still in that?
Oh no, so one council that I work with, they do have lots of cash, so you can guess who that is. They are looking at self-insurance, a degree of self-insurance. That's an 18-month project.
That wouldn't be Wellington.
Sorry?
That wouldn't be Wellington.
It wouldn't be. Well, I don't deal with Wellington, fortunately. Right. But again, going to the broker is probably a 6 month, at least 6 months.
When you've got three councils.
Correct. Oh yeah, you've got to do it. You've got to do it together. All right. So no further discussion on the insurance report. Can I have a move that we receive the report? Councillor Dale, seconded. You're on the committee, count.
No, you can't.
No, sorry. Nice try. You were just
try.
Right? Councillor. Deputy Mayor Steve, all those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Next report is our Treasury Report. Take it as read. Any comments, questions? From Kara? Okay. No questions? We're all in the money.
Just under the page 13, under the interest rate summary at the top.
Yep.
Is it really bucket or is it bracket?
It is bucket, so that's what they PwC call it, is bucket. But we have I did note that it should say next to it months, so it's the bucket of 0 to 1 month.
Okay.
Yeah,
Couldn't work out.
I did note in the other one, because these are little snips from our PwC report, and I did notice in the funding summary on the previous page, it does say bucket years. So I'll just get them to add that to
Bucket, yeah.
to the report.
I thought it was bucket years, right? But not, it's actually bucket month.
Yeah.
Because what happens is this is, you know, you talk about accountants talking bean counter language. This is Treasury people talking funny money, right? And they talk about buckets.
Yeah.
Thought it was.
We talk about jam jars, they talk about bucket.
Maybe we could get them to change it if you.
That's an allocation. All right, no.
First
Great.
question with regards to the investments one and our earlier paper. I'm not on the investment committee, so I just wondered if you're able to speak to your confidence in the investments that have been queried by audit.
The issue with the investments that have been queried by audit is just the treatment of the investment in the financial report. So there's nothing as far as that goes that's wrong with the investment. It's just it should be in this line, not this line. So and there should be a little separate disclosure for it to say, you know, I can't even remember the wording for it now, but yeah, it should just so. It's not an issue with the actual investment, just the treatment of it in the financial report.
The accounting standards.
Yeah, so
reporting.
So I understand that that's audit's issue.
Yeah.
Is there an issue? We noted that there's only 2 councils that have that kind of investment. In your opinion, do you think that's an issue or a risk?
I'm not.
That's not your department?
No,
Okay,
I'm
right.
not the expert in that area.
That's
So
the advisors.
That's the
Not the finance team.
Yeah, and the chief executive.
We don't make that decision. We're not involved in those decisions.
Okay, thank you. No further. Right, we've got 2 recommendations there on page 15. Can I have a mover? No one wants to move. I'll move. I haven't moved anything. Right. The Deputy Mayor Steve will second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. Next item is our work plan. So just take that as read. Are there any additions? And I think it's Jerry coming back. I think. No, we've agreed that we're going to put it on in the February work plan, a insurance, probably workshop and discussion, and maybe linked to a risk appetite review, because the 2 go hand in hand.
I think we had that risk framework.
We did have a framework,
Which is part of that, and I thought that what.
I just wonder whether
is it for?
And insurance reviewers.
Yeah, I just
about 26.
Both into February.
I think we bring them forward.
Yep.
You have a matter? Yeah, you can speak. Yeah. Oh, we're going to do this. Yep.
The auditors have recommended that we adopt the annual report for next year early. Before the
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Grice. Now, once everyone's picked themselves off the floor from laughing.
Have they explained how they're going to help us do that?
So I think it should be noted. That would mean we would just go into a continuous audit from April this year and well into, let's just keep going. So I think it should be noted that that would be desirable to get the annual report adopted. So
Down their alley, right? because the cost is already contracted, isn't it?
Yeah. But they could do a variation to contract. And of course, there is the risk that the local water done well will require auditing. I know. Breathe.
Councillor.
We're also talking about having a line across every meeting where it's an emerging risk category or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just so there's a open forum for.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Anything else we need to add, particularly to the February meeting?
Where would advice? Where would risk and assurance undertake the opportunity to assess the ongoing risk to councils through protracted audit processes and potentially come up with a recommendation to council as to a more efficient and cost-effective pathway forward?
Well, I think Councillor Grace has already suggested that that's an emerging risk, and I think that would be the broad heading you could actually say is that this is now emerging risk for council. Now the chief executive would actually say this is an emerging risk and this is to mitigate that risk. Here are the recommended, here's my advice in terms of mitigating that risk. That's what I see. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Terry, got nothing to add?
Well, I guess just to say this is always fluid, of course.
Yep.
Yeah. So as things, emerging risks arise, it's come in and some may move. But great to have a framework, guiding staff.
Yep. All right. So we've got two recommendations there. Can I have a mover, please? Mayor and Councillor, was it Councillor Dale? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against carry. Another movement of public excluded. Mayor Steve, do I have a seconder? Dale, all those in favour, please say aye. We've got minutes of the 14th of August.